paid good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Internationally known special effects staff presents an epic-making science fiction film starring many of Hollywood's top stars. In Latitude Zero, you will see Utopia, a mysterious underwater city where the greatest scientific minds in the world have been assembled.
Is this what I think it is?
Diamond.
But is it real?
Everything in Latitude Zero is real.
Here we go.
Malic the murderer has a diabolical plan to conquer the world. The submarine Alpha of Latitude Zero attacks Malic's submarine of death, the Black Shark. You will see futuristic weapons and the Battle of Blood Rock, Malic the Murderer's base of evil.
Lucretia!
Malic!
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Carol Borden.
Hi, everybody.
Also joining us is Mr. Walter Chaw.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sci-Fi July continues with Ishiro Honda's Latitude Zero, written by Ted Sherdeman and based on his and his wife Anne's NBC radio serial of the same name. The film stars Joseph Cotten as a Captain Nemo-like pilot of a submarine that makes its way and lives in Latitude Zero. We will be spoiling this film as much as we can, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen this movie. You will not be sorry, and we will still be here. So, Carol, when was the first time you saw Latitude Zero, and what did you think?
I was looking up my oldest tweet about Latitude Zero, and it was 2014, and I think that it must have been around then because I immediately started hassling other people to see it, so I don't think I would have waited too long. And I was filled with wonder and awe about this movie. It's probably one of the most astonishing movies I think I've seen.
I wouldn't disagree. And Walter, how about yourself?
I don't really know, but it would have been around that period of time. It was, that radio serial that you mentioned by Ted Sherdeman and his wife, I think was part of the reason that this wasn't released, like on home video, like all the other, Toho and Showa Katsu is what they call the movies. Unlike those movies, they weren't released because they were afraid that there might be some kind of copyright dispute, I think, or something with the serial. So they delayed release of this on DVD until about 2006.
And just when we were finding out interesting things, too.
Yeah, and so I must have seen it at some point after that, and I shared Carol's astonishment that such a film could actually exist. It almost is like Calvin Ball, how it just makes up rules as it goes along, kind of. And, it starts out as this underwater kingdom Utopia movie that seems like almost a subgenre of its own. And then all of a sudden it becomes the Island of Dr. Moreau. And there's really a gross surgery scene, I have to say. And there's no blood or anything, but the sound effects and the zeal that Cesar Romero has and like kind of cutting into the brain of a lion, I think. Anyway, it is so many different things. And then it becomes Journey to the Center of the Earth. It's this mishmash of Verne and Wells, and it's like absolute joy if you are tuned to the right frequency, which I suspect we all are, right? Yeah, it's truly astonishing. I don't want to say it's singular because I think there are some things that are like it, but yeah, my gosh, it's a good time.
I have a friend who describes it as continuously escalating.
That's a really good description because, yeah, it starts off pretty quiet, just these three guys on a bathysphere. And, we've seen that before. I mean, it's almost the beginning of the Meg, except there's no Richard Jekyll in the Meg, unfortunately. So I was surprised at just I was surprised that this was an English language Toho release. Like I was, I'll get the original Japanese and I'll watch that. And then when I was reading your article, Carol, I was like, oh, no, this is not the original one. That's the subsequent release, which is cut down by about 15 minutes or so. And in the original, everybody is speaking English. Even the Japanese actors are all speaking English, which I did not expect. And then, to see Richard Jekyll in here, he's kind of our protagonist for a little bit, mostly just because he doesn't get knocked out and he, seems to be pretty together.
I think they thought we have to have some kind of white guy actor to be the point of view character, but the film is not entirely sympathetic to him. It's almost just the form of having the white guy projectionist, like, oh, he's there, but you really prefer Ken Ishiro or Joseph Cotten or just about anybody.
Well, yeah, or Dr. Jules Masson, the Masuki Okada character, who unfortunately gets knocked out for a little while, but when he comes back strong. And I've seen Jekyll in 1,000 things, but I mostly remember him as being the sergeant in The Dirty Dozen, and I think he's the one that actually gives them their name.
So now, if you Dirty Dozen have no objections, we will get our equipment and we will start in right now.
Man, it is an interesting tale. This took me down a lot of rabbit holes because they were talking a lot about Latitude Zero, but it was Latitude Zero longitude 180 degrees, but then I was also looking at what is at 00 as far as lat long, only to find the story of the Null Island, which then took me into a cartoon I had never heard of before. And I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was just remarkable, this cartoon. It was so out there, and I think it was a 1960s cartoon, but unfortunately it has nothing to do with Latitude Zero. But I had no idea that this was based on a radio play until I read your article, and then it's nice that there's one episode out there, but I wish that there were a lot more.
I read a bunch of the synopses for the first 17 episodes, and they're all nuts too. They go to an island where there are demon trees, and those bat zombie guys are all through it, and Lucrezia has the power of necromancy and a vampiric gaze, and I would love to have seen this. I'd love to listen to these episodes. I would have loved to see this stuff, like if they had ever actually made the 1950s TV show, I would have loved to have seen what they did, although I'm also relieved that I don't get to see the racist depictions that they would have had in the 50s. And I wished that there had been a whole series of Ishiro Honda Latitude Zero stories with all this material that is just amazing.
What I really love about this stuff is that it reminds me of the, all the Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert Howard things that I was reading as I was growing up. I love Pulp Fiction, and Burroughs especially goes those places with Tarzan. By the fourth or fifth novel, Tarzan's a spy. He's like a French spy, and he fights Roman centurions. He fights Ant-Man. So all of those supernatural elements that you're describing, here they are in serial form. And I've long wished that we got a real Tarzan serial going, or a real, with what we can do today. With just really honoring Tarzan's shrunken now. Now Tarzan, or a real John Carter series. I mean, those serials went to all of these places. I feel like that this film is trying to go to. There's a manticore in this. There's battling submarines in this. There's brain transplants. There's this weird Black Widow spider lady. There's all of the stuff that is so juicy and provocative, and the flying monkeys from the Wizard of Oz as samurai bats. Kind of, I love this idea about how they couldn't afford to do more than sort of the rodents of unusual sizes from Princess Bride kind of costumes and stuff. Part of the reason for that, I'm sure it's in your article too, Carol, is that it was a co-production, right, with an American company that went out of business halfway through, and so I kind of pulled out until I was like, well, do we just finish up here, because we have Joseph Cotten in like a leisure suit, and we have in an ascot, and we have Cesar Romero under a ton of tanning solution. So do we finish, or do we pack up? And there's this in Cesar Romero's, I think, autobiography, he says something like, Toho approached the two American actors and Jekyll and said, look, we can't pay you for like 6 months until we make some of this money back, hopefully. And Cotton was like, no, you have to pay me immediately and everything. And then he and Romero had this conference, and Romero said, let's show them that we're not all ugly Americans. Let's just go ahead and do it on our honor and on their honor. And so, there's something really kind of interesting subtextually, Mike, to your point as well. There's so many rabbit holes that open up inter and extra textually about this movie, and just even starting with this idea of of an underwater utopia. That's a complete like socialist meritocracy, except that's only you're only invited if you're like a scientist or something in a gold bathing suit, I guess. But even the same year that this movie came out, there's a movie called Captain Nemo and the Underwater City, starring Robert Ryan and Chuck Connors. It's a British production that literally has Robert Ryan as kind of a stuffy Captain Nemo that lives underwater in this, utopia. Again, you have Irwin Allen did a couple of these, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The City Beneath the Sea in 1971, which has another utopian society called, and Godzilla versus Megalon, I think, has a utopia under the sea as well. There's a great Vincent Price movie, War God of the Deep, that has him playing sort of Captain Nemo and everything but name. Again, in the sort of underground space. And so there's something going on here. It's from Wells and Verne, but there's so much interesting stuff about this film, and the time, 1969, which is placed as well.
It's kind of a bait and switch, because we're introduced to these three guys in their bathysphere, and within 15 minutes, we're plunged into this whole different world where really Joseph Cotten usurps them as our protagonists, and it really becomes the Joseph Cotten versus Cesar Romero story. But then they both have the right hands. Cotten has, I'm trying to remember the name of the doctor that he has. She doesn't look like a doctor. Ann Barton is her. And then Romero's got Lucretia. And then Cotten has Kobo. Meanwhile, Romero has Kroiga. And man, oh man, Lucretia does not like Kroiga and does not make any bones about it. So you can see the strife that's going on, as opposed to, Ann Barton gets along with Kobo, gets along with Joseph Cotten, gets along with these new guys. She does a great job hiding her modesty when it comes to bathing. Kind of reminds me of the Anne Francis character from Forbidden Planet, where it's just like, what are these guys' problems? I have no problem with this. But I love that, boom, we're in this other world where the three guys, yeah, they're important still, but they really take a back seat, and they're pretty much like us. They are our way into this whole universe.
I find Anne to be a total cipher in this. She speaks entirely flatly, and there's not like any kind of emotion. And I think that actually works for it. The Cesar Romero is cloning things down here. He's like mashing up things. It's like, I don't actually know what kind of creature she is. Do you know? It's, it's never revealed that she's something. I'm sure she's not wearing her same brain. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there's something that's happened here. And so all the idiosyncrasies that people might pick out in terms of, performance, the unevenness or whatever, I forgive all of it because we're kind of talking about this alternate, it's like when you watch the Island of Dr. Moreau from 1966, the Richard Stanley Frankenheimer thing. It's like, Brando's wearing a like zinc with lipstick and a beekeeper hat. Fair game. It actually works. And, to your friend's point, Carol, it's like, it escalates so much. It begins with this sort of like, it's like BioShock, right? It begins with this advertisement almost. Well, in 1805, we started this project and, and then they show the technology and here's the bottle and it shows the model. But then, Mike, it becomes something completely different. But the escalation to me begins to forgive all of this stuff. When I see the paralyzed lion that gets the bat wings, it's like, fair game. This is all working for me for some reason. Not in a mean way, in a kind of overjoyed kind of way, right? I mean, I'm always the kind of guy that I don't care about the special effects. People are always talking about this is more convincing that. I really think the special effects are kind of dated the moment that they're shown, because the technology goes by. The mark of a film that I want to revisit over and over again is this kind of imagination. It's sort of like, the Chronicles of Riddick. I love it. I love it because it is so big. And every swing is for the rafters. I mean, there's no. I'm just gonna try. I'm a little afraid. It's like I'm gonna hit this out of the ballpark. Now I'm gonna get Judi Dench to do this, and so there's something about this too that I find to be bracing. It's almost like an Ed Wood movie. It's like this is you really kind of threw everything in here, and yeah, man.
It's joyous and imaginative, and no one is ashamed. To your point about Joseph Cotten and Cesar Romero and Richard Jekyll being convinced by Cesar Romero, like, let's not be ugly Americans. They went in all the way. Like, Joseph Cotten is clearly having the time of his life striding around in his gold lame buccaneer wear. And Cesar Romero is just swirling around in his villain outfits and sitting on his tiger skin throne and having such a fantastic time. And the whole movie feels like that. The whole movie, it feels like it's having a fantastic time. And it's just loving pulp and tokusatsu and kaiju and everything about it. And every kind of, well, not every kind of movie, but it has like 3 or 4, like now, there would be the underwater civilization movie, and that would be it. There'd be the submarine fighting movie, and that would be it. There'd be the kaiju movie, and that would be it. There'd be the Forbidden Island movie, and that would be it. And instead, they're like, fuck it, we're going to do everything. We're going to do everything we love in one thing. And we love this Ted Sherdeman and Sherdeman radio play, and God damn it, we're going to have it.
Well, and even by the end of it, it becomes this like social... Who could kill a child by the end of it, right? There's all of this actual footage of famine and war and violence that they're interjecting here with this, coda that we're still in our head of the Joseph Cotten character saying, you guys, we're just waiting for Earth to catch up to our vibe, man, because you guys are barbarians, and we can't, we're not going to invite you into the thing. It's like, Wakanda, right? I mean, they're right there. They're just hidden from sight until humanity gets it all together. And that's something that was always haunting to me about these Toho movies, the Godzilla movies and whatever, is not only that there are advanced civilizations and creatures that don't really care about us, but that we are not worthy to share in their utopia, to share in their wisdom. So many of these Japanese films are so complicated by American colonialism, by our presence. The Richard Jekyll character is seen with derision, just as he sees everything else with sort of derision, and he wants to, give up the goose and show everybody the, whatever. But the relationship that the Japanese has with American culture and vice versa is really fraught, I think. And Honda is a guy who was always really ethical about portraying those things. And so, not to get all serious about Latitude Zero unduly, but there's certainly elements of this which which honor the Toho series up to here, which honor, Honda's original Godzilla, which was quite a serious film in Japan when it first came out. It came in second behind The Seventh Samurai for their Oscars that year, I think. So there's something really culturally relevant too about the timing of this, about, this idea still that there's technology that we don't understand, that we wield recklessly, and we're not ready to have more technology because look at what happened last time.
I appreciate that if it were a solely American film, either we would it would automatically be given to us, or we, particularly in the late 60s, we would absolutely never deserve it. And it would just be completely dark instead of being not now, but we believe maybe sometime, like we believe you'll get there. We can't see how right now, but we believe you will. And then the other thing is you have, as you say, Richard Jekyll is being very consumerist, very appropriational, very crass, as you say about it. But on the other hand, you have Akira Takarada playing an intensely internationalist character who is open to new things, who's open to the world, who wants to be involved, who wants to be part of stuff. He's like working with an international crew. He's open to Richard Jekyll's journalist Perry Lawson character. He's open to Latitude Zero itself. I think that's really remarkable. And I'm always a little sad that because of the times, and because of the racism, Akira Takarada didn't get the career in the United States that I really think he deserved. But I'm glad that he had such a fabulous career elsewhere. So
I completely agree with the caveat that it's not really gotten better for Asian actors. I would just say I totally agree with you, and it's still not better. We have recent examples of guys like Zhou Fa and
poor Cho Yun Fat even.
And Jackie Chan, even. It's like, I don't know, come on, who else? Who's a bigger matinee idol than that? What a gorgeous man and great person. But yeah, we haven't really learned our lesson much. And what I appreciate about this is, something that you guys pointed out is that Jekyll is being like he's treated as he should be. He's treated as the guy that doesn't really quite get it. Absolutely, the ugly American, quote unquote, right? And this is the reason also that I didn't hate that movie, Great Wall of China. Was it called Great Wall or whatever, with Matt Damon? And everyone's all mad that Matt Damon's in this, Chinese production, but they treat him like this foul animal in that movie. That doesn't really understand. I fine. This is actually fair. This is how the Chinese at that time would have treated him. And so, there's something interesting about this film too, where as a co-production and with Ishiro Honda, who really an ethical filmmaker, that it's very clear that, Jekyll is behind the times. Jekyll is the element of danger for humanity, the character in this movie. And, whether he's the lead or not, whether Americans identified with him or not, I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's like, we are identifying, right? We are identifying with Akira Takarada. He is so urbane and so brilliant and even tempered throughout the whole of it. It's like, oh, it's a chimera, apparently. There's a lot like an equanimity to him and intelligence to him. That's really sexy, and Jekyll is just sort of like gross, like, oh, hey, look at her, he's gross, he's a horn dog. But there's that cultural tension is being explored here too. I think in a respectful way, in a kind of comedic kind of way, but in an obvious way too. It's like, here's where we don't quite get along. Here's the example in microcosm of why we don't get to live in Latitude Zero. Not yet.
I relate to him greatly that he's so excited about the food that he can get there. Like, I would be like that, like, oh, wow, look at all this food I could have.
That long dining sequence, it's so interesting, isn't it?
And I feel like it kind of underscores what you're or illustrates a little bit of what you're talking about, where Richard Jekyll's so busy trying to make sure that he's not a mark, that he's not being conned. Like, he's, what they call in wrestling a smart mark. Like, I'm not going to be fooled. And that makes him more easy to be conned, and it makes him less enjoying the wonders that are before him or willing to participate.
So brilliant that you're using a wrestling term for this film. That's brilliant. Yeah, it was spot on.
Even then, Akira Takarada's character is like, come join. Well, do you want to come enjoy this hallucination with me, or should I enjoy this hallucination alone when the food comes? Like they disagree, but he's still willing, if Richard Jekyll is willing, to join him, and they can be together.
This is the Matrix 30 years ahead of time, right? It's like this red steak. I know it's not real, but man, it's good steak. And it does speak to like this different kind of value system. It's like, live in the moment. Why are you thinking everybody's against you all the time? Settle down, man. You know, they're feeding us. This is a miracle. This is great.
All the people trampolining, all the gold clothes, like, just enjoy.
Since this was from the 1940s, it has that feel still. It feels almost like, I made the reference to Forbidden Planet before. It feels like that kind of sci-fi movie. It feels like, Fire Maidens on the Moon. It just has that type of camp to it. And that being in 1969, of course, camp is never going to die, and camp was Cesar Romero's bread and butter for a little while when it came to Batman. And then, Joseph Cotten was not above that as well. So he was in some interesting roles too. And they just play to the hilt when it comes to this. I love scenes of like when Cotten is driving his boat to his submarine, and you just see that like concerned look on his face as he's just moving the wheel back and forth and just really giving his all. He is into this role. I have to mention the ascot again. So posh. I love it. Just he's the chicest man on the ocean floor.
As I was watching, I was kind of thinking of this as him playing Kane, that he finally gets his chance now to say, instead of being the person that observes, ironically, the narcissism and the ego taking over eventually until a person's like sort of living in their own little Xanadu, I guess. He kind of reminded me of this sort of Kane-like figure where he's so superior. He's so cocksure. He's so opulent. There's this sort of like, hey, at that rate, I could only run this newspaper for 350 years. There's something so grandiose about him, and so feeling like above it all, feeling so unctuous, even in some ways. I say unctuous, but I love him. But he's a little bit oily in this movie. Oh, and his wife, right, is in this movie. She's Patricia Medina, and I've never really seen her very much, but I thought she was quite good in this as well, especially when she's coming at him with a hypodermic.
I love the decorations of the sets, that you feel that both of these submarines have very different personalities. I mean, in Cesar Romero's, he's got that leopard print, the leopard print seats, and more like eagle type of decorations, and then you get a lot of fish decorations when it comes to Joseph Cotten's ship, and you really feel like they went to the mat to make these very different sets for these folks to be traipsing around in.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I wondered as I was watching it if this film was influenced in some way by Mario Bava's Danger Diabolique, which came out right before this, I think just a year before it. There is something about like this James Bond era. I think we're into On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969, but is that the fifth or sixth James Bond? But, so we're sort of in this era of, and I sort of got the feeling of the Prisoner as well, the great Patrick McGowan series, of the jumpsuited villains, the underground volcanic lairs or the underwater lairs, the submarine cars and the jetpacks and all these things. We're sort of at an interesting technological age here too in our science fiction, and this is coming at the end of a period in Japan. I don't really know how to say it in Japanese, but they call it the first monster boom, in which there's like a social phenomenon. Carol, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, and but the like TV shows like Ultraman were becoming really popular with kids. Ambassador Magma, Ultra Q, they're becoming a big deal, and they were sort of beginning to learn about toys and merchandising to tie in with all this stuff and everything. And after Destroy All Monsters, I think Toho said no more kaiju, we're done with this kind of stuff. But then they made this movie, and I gotta think that it's sort of like this. Almost, again, another summary film, right? Another sort of thing that says, okay, we recognize that we're cresting a wave here, and we don't really want to be left behind here on something that we've done. And we're having this sort of, intrusion in the American market. This is not the first Toho American partnership, but they're feeling like there's an intrusion now. There's an opportunity maybe for us to get into the American market. This is where Astro Boy and Voltron eventually come out of this period too. But there's something to that. I think that, even as I'm watching it as a full grown ugly man, adult for the first time, I have no sense of nostalgia for this particularly, except that when I watch it, all I feel is nostalgia for this period of time, right? I didn't watch it when I was a kid, but I watched like most of the other ones when I was a kid. And watching this is just like, man, this is amazing. This is exactly what I felt like when I thought like maybe, I was 8 years old and maybe I was losing my mind. Like I was watching something that I shouldn't be watching, is Doctor Who, and then, got Godzilla versus Megalon or something, where you feel like, are there twin Japanese fairies here that are singing tomorrow? You are suddenly destabilized in everything you feel comfortable with in your culture. And, here's really this what is it? This response that the Japanese had to our colonizing their entertainment was them kind of like reconstituting it and giving it back to us in kind of a subtly Japanified way. I lacked the terms and the erudition to describe what's happening here, but it's almost like rap music, right? You're assuming the signs and signifiers of a colonial culture, and you're returning it to them in a way that reflects your culture. And there's something about this that is always magical to me. The white characters in anime, all this stuff is fascinating because it talks about this political tension that we have between our two cultures. I think this monster boom began in Japan really because the copyright on King Kong was falling. So they were taking King Kong now and making movies like that to give back to the United States, like King Kong versus Godzilla, that we're now reproducing in a really kind of culturally blank kind of way, or destructive kind of way, because we are who we are. But there's this real sense of like, this is around the period where there's a movie like War of the Gargantuas. What it's doing is it's playing with these ideas of Universal Studios monsters, and it's, the ideas of cloning in the seawater, and which reminds me of Twilight Zone. It just fills me with like this sense again of possibility. You get to be as an old, bitter film critic, and you feel like I've seen it. You can't surprise me, you guys. And then you watch something from 1969, you're like, okay, I take it back. Everything is new again. It's a whole new world out there, and everything's possible. And there's no guardrails for them. Always more wonders.
Like you said, this is an Americans who defaulted on their part of the bargain, American-Japanese co-production. This is also around that time, I want to say it was just slightly before this, that Rankin and Bass came over to Japan and started working with Japanese people. And that's really what happened, what helped out with the whole Animagic. I mean, but years and years before The Simpsons were employing Korean animators, Rankin and Bass were using a lot of Japanese animators and Japanese live action stuff. I mean, they were part of that whole King Kong Escapes, I want to say, was theirs. And then they had that Godzilla TV show. The King Kong show. That's what it was. I want to say they had a Godzilla show too, but I could be very wrong about that. But yeah, they had the King Kong animated show. They had the Smokey the Bear shows. Those were all Toei animated things. And they continued to use Japanese producers and talent for pretty much their entire run. I mean, even up to like the Bermuda Depths. I mean, that's basically a kaiju movie set over in Bermuda, and it's partially Japanese funded, partially American funded again. So this was a really nice moment in time where we were having this kind of cultural synergy with Japan and being able to go back and forth, like you said, with these, lobbing things from one side of the ocean to the other.
Even going back to like the late 19th century, it's true.
Yeah, we were so intimately involved with them and they with us in the development of our separate modernities. I mean, even if you think about the best picture in the United States from last year. And so, our cultural evolution is so intimately entwined, right? That it's really lovely to be able, for me anyway, for what it's worth, to be able to pull out those threads watching Latitude Zero, watching Destroy All Monsters, or, Battle Gargantua. There's a unbelievable sort of sense of fulfillment that I get from having this kind of conversations with people like you, where I feel like oh man, the world is so confusing and huge. Isn't it beautiful that art sometimes makes it really kind of small and legible? As huge as it is, these ideas and these Jungian spiritual ideas, at the base of it is the two cultures sort of exploring modernity together and what they're afraid of. And, they kidnap a doctor in Latitude Zero, right? Because he's revolutionized, radiation. And radiation seems to be the basis for a lot of these movies. Again, I think even in the Gargantua's movie, right? The Beast from 20,000 Leagues. Anyway, they're always shooting radiation pellets at each other and stuff. And there's this sense of shooting radiation out of their suits. And that, radiation is the topic that we as Americans introduced into the world, released, and now every culture has to deal with it, specifically Japan. And, we're still there, I guess, with Oppenheimer and everything. We're still having this conversation into modernity. And Godzilla is a big franchise for us in the United States, even though we don't understand it.
Yeah, and Japan's thinking about we need to change our constitution and just sort of pretend certain things didn't happen, and then we can be a nuclear power too.
Yeah, it is interesting that it's a Russian scientist that's down there, Dr. Karnak, and to find out that this is where all of these scientists, all those scientists that disappear, yeah, they all end up here. We just pluck them out and they figure out how to do things like filter the gold out of the seawater so we all have these golden clothes that you can just recycle pretty easily and get some new golden clothes.
Or make an underwater sun.
And how to make this amazingly huge and accurate model of the settlement of Latitude Zero, so Joseph Cotten can use a big old pointer and be like, and over here we have this.
We own cable companies in 38 states. We own a steel mill in Cleveland, shipping in Texas, oil refineries in Seattle, and a factory in Chicago that makes miniature models of factories.
I liked that they had cows, that they brought cows down.
I want to see that trip. And then all the diamonds that they just use as
like filler for plants. Yeah.
We can make gold, but we can't make a nice Gruyere without this cow. There's a sense of absolute possibility in this future. And I think so much of our science fiction now is, zombies or it's A Quiet Place or it's, what happened to the science fiction that is aspirational? Okay, you ain't there now, but the United Federation of Planets is in the next 30 years. We're gonna meet a Vulcan any time now. We're gonna be good. Where's the sense of aspiration? And I think, this is a very broad statement. Of course, there's aspirational science fiction still, but it seems like in our common zeitgeist, if you will, here in the country with a scary election coming up and everything, there's this idea that, we don't have much of the future. We're end times now. We're all Roland Emmerich movies instead of Honda movies. But, I do feel the sense of exhilaration of hopefulness when I watch movies that are this engaged, this unembarrassed about the possibilities. Neil deGrasse Tyson is not welcome here. We're going to put we're going to put a bat's brain. And, we're going to put this woman's brain in this lion's body. We're going to give him bat wings. And that makes sense.
Yeah. And if you're good enough at suspending your disbelief, which I was, it's really upsetting. Like I've seen that scene, I don't know how many times now. And it's deeply distressing. And as you were pointing out, the American company stopped funding them. And I was reading in Auguste Dragone's book, A.J. Tsuburaya, Master of Monsters, it meant that they couldn't fulfill Tsuburaya's designs. So they have a guy they have Hiro Nakajima, the Godzilla actor, in a lion suit that's like a furry, plushy lion suit. But it's really upsetting. And it's somehow even more uncanny and upsetting to see that, like, he's also, I have to say, he does a great job being a lion, like, especially with what he's given. And that whole scene when they're transplanting that poor screaming woman's brain into a lion and attaching wings and then enlarging her and using her as a weapon is just, it's horrific and upsetting.
It's exactly the amount of horrific and upsetting it should have been in that stupid effing Star Wars movie where they turn the rebellious rebel leader robot brain into the Millennium Falcon.
Oh God, that was upsetting. Yeah.
Yes. And they treat it like kind of a joke or something. It's like, hey, guess what? You get to be a slave. And for the rest of the movies, we're going to see you getting punched and abused by, your new master. And it's like, no, you can't have this both ways, George Lucas and Ron Howard. You can't do that crap. And so, yeah, to your point, it's like, this is a movie, and for as, we want to at the special effects, it's actually really effective. It actually works better than like a cunning 21st century, morph or whatever. It's really effective that it looks janky. It's really effective that it feels like a total violation of this. And, and Honda, one of the things that he did in the army was he was in charge of managing comfort women in China. And he wrote this thing about it, an article about it, where he's like really going through the trauma of it, for himself and for the women that he was controlling. It's called Reflections of an Officer in Charge of Comfort Women. It was published in 1966. And I think about that too when I look at his movies and the treatment of women in those movies, and how there's always this sort of sense of like awfulness about the way that they are used and abused in our culture. The couple moments of laugh lines and a couple moments of real horror that come in this film are from both of those angles, I think, from the nudity that Mike was talking about earlier, and then from this horrific brain transplant that happens in it.
Sort of building on that and going back to your previous point about Dr. Barton, who was played by, I think, Linda Haynes, and her delivery, I think some of that is like he was clearly directing her to play herself as a serious doctor and use her serious doctor voice when she was talking about doctor things. And also, like, on one hand, this was a traumatic head injury for Dr. Jules Masson, but it was something that was relatively simple for the science of Latitude Zero. So she has this balance of, this is a serious situation and I'm using serious doctor voice, but also it's something we can handle. So I don't need to get, too upset about it. As long as we take him in and get him treated, he's fine. Contrasted with, she's going to wear her personal style. And I think if she had worn her gold lame headband and her gold lame and clear plastic mini dress in one of the other movies from 1969, they would be like, no, you can't act like a serious doctor while doing serious doctor things in this outfit. I can see what you're talking about in just like their decisions around her direction and her characterization. Like, she's expressing herself with her clothing, and she is taken seriously as a professional in her context.
When you're talking about the cheese factor of this, and also the idea of this being a Honda film and being a kaiju film without kaiju, the use of the miniatures has always impressed me when it comes to these films, and this is no exception. The whole disembarking from their ship and the thing that comes out and the rails that come up and the ladder that comes down or the platform that comes down, all of that is great to watch. All of these things with the boats that are above the water, because, obviously when you're shooting the submarines, you're kind of more in an enclosed area. But to have the surface of the water, which can look really fakey, but have these boats on there, I think it all looks really good, and it just adds to the factor of it. That lion costume is pretty rough. The rodents of unusual size are pretty rough. The whole manticore thing so reminds me of going back to Rankin Bass again. It reminds me of King Moonracer, the king of the misfit toys. He looks almost exact. He's just missing a crown, basically.
What do you desire?
Well, we're a couple of misfits from Christmas Town, and now we'd like to live here.
No, that would not be possible. This island is for toys alone.
How do you like that? Even among misfits, you're misfits.
The miniatures are so masterful, and they're so much a part of my real love for these Toho films. The matte paintings, the miniatures, the way that the water looks too big. The way that the fire looks too big, because it is, that is part of my dream life, if you will. Like, it's almost when you watch a movie from the American 70s, immediately because of the way that it's shot, the film stock, the lighting, the same with these movies. These movies hold a very dear emotional place in my memory of my childhood. And it has so much to do with just the care that they always take. The extended docking sequence that they have in this film of the submarine coming out and this big red crane comes over, and I see it, and I think you mentioned in our notes or something, Mike, it reminds me a lot of, Denis Villeneuve's Dune films. This is real love of models and the love of, I know they're not real models in Dune, but, the love of the sort of architecture of technology of the future and this grand, it's almost like the opening of Star Trek, the motion picture, the first one, where they spend a good 10 minutes just looking at the prize. They kind of send a little shuttle out and Shatner is looking at it, and there's such a grandness and a love for the craft of futurism, of building something like this. It's dear to me, and I watch this and I feel like, oh, it's almost as if my dad made it or something. There's something about this that's very connected to my childhood. And that uncanniness, I will never say it looks just like real. It's better than real. And I don't know how, but there's something dear about it,
I love that these things are inviting you into an imagined world. So and I feel, obviously loving this movie, it's going to be unsurprising that I feel like that Hollywood in particular has gotten caught up in the way we'll handle suspension of disbelief and drawing you into this world is we'll make it look real. It's like a snake eating its tail. Like the more things they try to fix about suspending your disbelief for you, the more things they have to do that with. And when you're faced with these models and the scale issues of the fire in the water and the lion suit and stuff like that, even Godzilla, like you decide right then if you're with it or not. And if you're with it, then it's sort of something beyond reality. It's like, it's transcendent, and it can be a wonderful experience if you open yourself up to that.
That's exactly the word. Some of the most vivid, dramatic, exciting, horrifying experiences I've had in my life are playing with Legos that weren't branded when I was a kid. And Legos don't look like anything except for Legos, right? In my mind, this is a time machine that went to the medieval times, and there was a monster that followed them through the hole. And, it's transcendent. We're capable of this as people, right? I don't need, Rankin and Bass still gives me more nightmares than, the most graphic, terrified film or whatever. We're capable of this stuff. It's almost like we're being patronized when they're saying we're going to make this photo real so you get it. And then so much of the criticism is like, no, I could tell that it was CGI. I don't think you actually could. I think you just didn't like it. And this is the way that you're going to express that you didn't like it. But what a shame that so much of us are caught up on, is it real? Because it's like better than real, isn't it? I mean, real is like, I'm on Twitter. That's horrible enough, right?
Well, also Twitter's trying to convince you that that's real, and then convince you that this other stuff that's wonderful and inspirational and transcendent and the best things about humans, that's all bullshit. That's the bullshit. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm swearing, Mike.
You're okay by me?
We're really in trouble if we can't love things that are delightful. This is delightful. My kids are grown now, but when they're like 3 years old, if they ran to me and said, "Daddy, this is a horse with a serpent's tail," I was like, "That is delightful, and I love it." I'm not going to be like, "Nah, it wouldn't work." I think he's dead. You have to be delighted sometimes, and films like this always that are delightful, right?
My favorite film of this year so far is Hundreds of Beavers. I mean, there's not a whole lot of reality in that movie, and that's what I love, is that we're in this very made up world, and with people running around in beaver and rabbit and etc. costumes, but it's fucking amazing.
And beautifully crafted.
Oh, God, yes.
For like $5.
Exactly. I mean, give me those creatures. Give me the weird bat creatures that Cesar Romero is threatening the scientist and his daughter with. I mean, it's delightful stuff.
I actually read this thing that said, hey, that the bat attack was weird because it was out of scale. I was like, dude, I don't know what exactly you thought that you were watching for the first hour and a half of this, but I didn't even understand that criticism anymore. You know what I mean? I was like, what? A scale card, what?
People take a bath to become invincible. Then they have gloves that can shoot out fire, gas, lasers. Guy steps in a pool of acid. His shoe disappears or his boot disappears, but he's okay because he took his bath in the pool of invincibility. That's the movie you're watching.
I didn't even mind the racism in that scene where it was like, I've been hit harder by a ping pong ball. I'm like, it's just so kind of innocent. I'm like, okay, I'll give you this one.
Well, at least they got away from the incredibly overt racism of the radio serial.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, I bet.
Yes.
I bet. Nope.
Yeah, what was that guy's name? Because he wasn't Kobo originally.
Simba. He was Simba. He was Simba in that. And then when they were reworking it for the 50s, the two guys who were handling the script treatment told Sherdeman, well, we're changing his name from Simba to another Swahili word, mango, which I think means teeth, because too many people know that Simba means lion in Swahili. I'm going to share this with you. I didn't put it in my piece where I was talking about this, but I was tempted. I'm sure there are people who speak Swahili in Senegal, because Simba is a Senegalese man, and you can see, because they're making him a Senegalese man, that they're trying. They're trying really hard not to be racist like the other things, but they're being racist in just a slightly different way with the same material. So like, oh, he's a gigantic black man who barely speaks, but he speaks French, because in Senegal they speak French, and he has a Swahili name, but the largest language family, as I remember, in Senegal is like Wolof. But, it's the 50s and they're trying, so I'm not going to be like, oh, you should have had a Wolof name. But because basically there's a part in the radio script where they describe the Kobo character Simba as being like a robot, and all he says is like, oui, mon capitaine, and no, mon capitaine.
Simba.
Oui, mon capitaine.
I am going below to rest. Do not harm my friends. Do not allow them to leave this deck. Your wound will be healed before I awake. The element wire will see to that. You understand?
Je comprends, mon capitaine.
Good.
And I think he would have been better as a robot, because then he'd be like, yes, no, I'm a robot. I do robot things. And he could be an adorable 50s robot that's made out of like ventilation hoods and has those wiggly arms and stuff. Like that would have been great. Yeah, it's Kobo. Simba becomes Kobo.
Right, and he only says one phrase in Japanese. He doesn't speak English.
Yeah, he says like, yes, Captain, all the time. At least there isn't the anti-black racism in it.
I'll say this now that you're mentioning that, is that I always go to the mat for Edgar Rice Burroughs as actually pretty progressive for the 1930s. That there's, for any time really, because there are times that Tarzan says stuff like, it doesn't matter what the color of a man's skin is, it matters, what the heart is. And then there's all these other depictions that we would look at and say, of course that's racist. That's such a, and yet there are these attempts by Burroughs throughout to say, wait a minute. All the bad guys in my books are like white colonialists, and all the good guys are, the tribesmen that are empathetic with Tarzan and his mission. So anyway, I would just, ancillarily, nobody asked. I'm just going to be defensive on this.
Well, it's comparable with Sherdeman. Like, he's doing pretty good for the time. He's trying. He's reading about stuff. He knew that. Like, he knew that people in Senegal that were colonized by the French, and there's a lot of French-speaking people in Senegal. So,
without saying, if you just looked at who I was like 20 years ago, we're always learning. I think we got to give room for people to learn.
But it is something that I liked about reading these, like the scripts over time. You can see Sherdeman grow.
Yeah, and we should probably say, too, that Sherdeman is no slouch. I mean, this guy, major creator, and did a lot of stuff that I never knew that he was behind. So when I'm reading this article, I'm like, yeah, exactly, Them. One of the most popular sci-fi movies of its time. I mean, that's pretty remarkable, guys.
It is indeed. And another nuclear fear film, right? And it's interesting to think that we're talking about an age of creators that were all in the war, often on opposite sides of the war. And now they're kind of collaborating on pieces that are talking about the fallout, not to no pun intended, I guess. But the fallout from the end of the war, that they both participated in on opposite sides of it. They're just, within hours of each other, maybe, of like murdering each other. And now they're making a film together. Isn't that Latitude Zero, right? Isn't that the kind of dream of being able to create with somebody that you were, trying to kill on behalf of your government just a few months ago? There's a real beauty to that. And I thought about the title too, this idea of not giving anyone any kind of latitude, and the danger maybe of the idea behind those utopian societies. They seem to inevitably fall into fascism at some point. And like with the video game series BioShock, it begins as this sort of utopia and it ends with this like gene splicing horror, which is kind of what this movie is about as well. At what point do we want to control, like Gattaca, our offspring and the things that we are able to do genetically and everything? And that becomes this other science fiction shell that we're knocking at here into the new millennium. And I don't know, a movie that, of course, it's, fun and cheesy and maybe whatever it is. I think it touches on all of these things and allows for further conversation and preparation for, the next phase or the next iteration of a lot of these really complex ideas about how we live with each other and how we make culture, how our culture diffuses into one another.
I have to admit, I couldn't remember that I wrote about Dune in the notes, but then I remembered now that it was because eventually this becomes a quest in order to save the scientist that was kidnapped and his daughter that was kidnapped by Malic. They're on his island and wearing these little jetpacks, and the way that they shoot up are reminding me of the Harkonnens in Dune, with the way that they would kind of go up these mountains and stuff. And obviously, it's a little bit smoother in Dune too, but it works for me here with these guys. And you get some of those great perspective shots where they're just like on miniatures and things, and they're all dressed the same. They kind of remind me of like a superhero team, or like, even I know they're not wearing different colored costumes, but it reminds me a little bit of the Power Rangers or something, like as far as that aesthetic that they have going.
What I think is so effective about the Dune special effects is how simple at their heart they are. Like, the ornithopters are dragonflies. When the Harkonnen want to get up there, they just kind of float up there. And they don't grow like giant mechanical spider legs and, pinion themselves up the side of the thing with, it's very simple. And it's the kind of the basic ideas of these Honda films kind of expanded to, now we're able just to erase those lines or whatever. It's smoother. But so would this film have been had Americans not pulled out their funding. Do you know what I mean? The special effects in some of these other Honda movies and the Godzilla movies, I don't need to tell you, are actually kind of amazing. They're really good. They're really smooth. And the sort of jankiness of this is because they didn't really have the money to do it. But again, for me, and we keep beating this horse and I'll stop now. But for me, that they kept going, that they agreed to do it, that they kept going, that is what we're here for, right? That's the whole reason we got started doing this. So there's so many different professions we all could have and should have chosen, but that we've given our lives over to talking about films is because of moments like this where everyone gets together and says, yeah, we're going to make this film together, and it's going to be hard, but we're going to get through it. And, I love the scene towards the end where they walk through this valley of radioactivity and it's full of skeletons and everything. And I'm like, again, this really loaded image of a valley of waste and death that we're being fed every day on Twitter, speaking of which, that we're seeing again now, that these images are evergreen, and it doesn't matter how much money they spent on them. There's a real wisdom and creativity in being presenting these ideas. When we look at the janky manticore, you will never not think of the atrocity of that being a woman bent to do that.
This thing that you're talking about, that these people got together and created, that's inspirational and joyous and hopeful and reflective of experiences, was made by people who had been in war, who had experienced the atrocities of war, and most of them had been mobilized, like on all levels of the project. And what they chose to make was something like that. And I've been thinking about that a lot more in comics, because I used to write more about comics. And we have all these creators in American comics who create people like Superman, who create a Batman who doesn't kill, who create all these heroes who don't kill, who have experience with killing people, with seeing people killed, with seeing cities and houses and families and entire landscapes destroyed. And that's the stories they chose to tell. And now we have people telling us what's realistic who don't have those experiences and who are sort of lecturing the people of the past of, like, again, going to comics, your Batman is unrealistic. Superman should be a fascist. And I hear echoes of that when I'm like, Latitude Zero is unrealistic. And I agree with you. There's some concerns about, like, oh, it could go into a libertarian utopia. And next thing you know, they all have tetanus because no one's doing their chores and they live in a shipping container. But I love that people who had these experiences, who were on opposite sides, could come together and just, make such a fun, delightful, wondrous little thing.
Absolutely. These guys are like, we were on the verge, you guys, of destroying the world. Let's do something different. Let's make something together.
And we're going to put Trampolinus in it, and there's going to be a manticore lion griffin thing and rat guys.
We're going to give Joe Cotten this, like, strappy little insouciant thing to wear, evening wear. Come on.
And all the men of the advanced civilization wear patent leather buccaneer boots, so you guys get with the program.
I've got mine on right now.
What do you guys make of the Wizard of Oz type ending that this movie has?
I'm home at last.
Oh, you must have had a bad dream.
No. I was there.
Where were you?
I was on this terrible mountain ruled by the evil Dr. Klon. And there were prisoners, and Jake was there, and Slim, and Ben. Maybe it was just a dream.
And quite a nasty one, young feller.
It was a dream of extraordinary magnitude.
I think it's always grounding, right? I mean, I was looking at the Wizard of Oz as like the Heart of Darkness, right? Where Apocalypse Now and the Wizard of Oz are the same film, kind of, where you go upriver and with different aspects of your personality. And at the end of it, you get to decide, whether you're taking the red pill or the blue pill, right? You're either going to live in fantasy world with all the gumdrops and stuff, or you're going to go back to a very black and white and geometric sort of idea of Kansas. And there's that in this film as well, right? I think what they're saying is, like, we're offering you this idea of utopia. There's this idea that we could work together towards something really great together. You are choosing Richard Jekyll to be so damned literal about all this stuff. It's almost like a meta criticism of critics of movies like this to say, yeah, you could live in the world where manticores don't kill Cesar Romero, or you could come with me and we could see what could be. We could see what could be. And Wizard of Oz is another one of those miraculous films that doesn't really have a father or a mother, right? Who made the ruby shoes ruby? It's like, we don't really know. It's not Oz's stuff. It's not. There's like 7 different directors. It's like, occasionally we get these sort of like miraculous births, and I think Wizard of Oz is really one that expresses a certain, time era for us at the end of the Depression. But with this too, we're talking about coming through into modernity, and there's so many fathers and mothers to this idea of this film. We can't just say it's Honda. It isn't just the American component. It's all of this stuff, and it's the war. And we've created something that's like, here's the possible, the very limits of what's possible versus what is. And, every one of us get to choose which one that we want to pursue.
I like, too, that Cesar Romero shows up at the end. It's kind of a little bit of a redemption for him, too.
Yeah, and the idea that the shadow shouldn't be murdered, the shadow should be, nurtured. It's Jung for dummies, right? It's Babadook. But I do like, that as well.
One thing that gives me hope about the future of Latitude Zero within the film Latitude Zero is the respect that they have for people's agency, because they have this ideal. And one of the things that happens with like a lot of fascism begins with an ideal of it's going to be so great. You guys don't even know how great it's going to be. And then there are basically haters who have to be either brought into line and understand how great it's going to be, or eliminated because they're contaminating. They're the reason that the ideal world is not happening in the real world when we implement it. But Latitude Zero is letting people have choices and respecting those choices. So, they play a little trick on him by he had gotten this bag of the diamonds they used for their plant filler to make their plants look nice to bring back with him. They let him take it, and then they filled it up with tobacco so nobody would believe him. And I always have a little bit of, because of women in film and being a woman, there's always a little bit like, oh no, the gaslighting. They're treating him like he's crazy. Uh-oh. But they give him his money. They send him his diamonds at the bank and hold it for him once he gets off the ship that has apparently rescued him from the bathysphere. And I feel like the saving grace of Latitude Zero in the film is that respect for agency. They will let people make their own choices, even if they're like Richard Jekyll, you're making weird choices and you're kind of a pain in the ass, but you get to be you.
Carol, that's such a brilliant point. That really is awesome. Yeah, I mean, yeah, all respect. That's fucking awesome. That's grand.
I think one thing that this is a major factor when it comes to making this feel more like a Honda film as well, this odd mix, is the music. And just that we get a lot of themes where I'm just like, okay, yeah, if a coupe, I'm trying to remember the name of because it's the same composer who did a lot of the Godzilla scores. And there's even, I want to say there's a phone ringing at one point, and it sounds almost like...
it's Ghidorah's cry. Yeah, it's Malic has Ghidorah's ringtone.
And every once in a while there's like that weird transition thing where it looks like almost like a Fallout warning or something that comes through. Yeah. And it's just like these little touches. It's so nice. I really like that they just have those little things in here where I'm like, okay, this reminds me of what I'm watching.
I love those. That's so pulpy. I love it. Yeah, that's what Lucas did with Star Wars, right? He did these little pulp transitions.
Doing the Kurosawa. Yeah. Well, didn't Honda work with Kurosawa before he...
That's right. Yeah. He was like first assistant director on Stray Dogs, and they worked together for the last 4 or 5 movies in Kurosawa's career too, I think.
Honda does a lot of the same.
Well, the thing that always impresses me with Kurosawa is his framing, and especially the way he frames characters. I mean, 2024, we're going to be able to see this restored version of Seven Samurai, and I love how he would frame the characters in there. And yeah, with this one, you get all of those shots inside of these submarines, so you're face on to all of the people that are looking out of that viewfinder, very Star Trek, speaking of Star Trek. And then even when they're in Latitude Zero, they will still stand in a row or all be facing the camera, and then Honda will move in on stuff. And there's a lot of nice little like quick zooms, and with some of those shots, it's a slow zoom in just to reframe the characters who are the most important ones in the scene. I thought that was very nice as well.
Yeah, I think this time I really paid attention to the sound design, and especially in the scene we were talking about before with the mad science surgery, like the sounds of the condor wings being torn off the condor is just, yeah.
Oh my God. And, well, the sawing too, that really bugged me. Yeah.
Yeah, they really got, I feel like they got some kind of real saw. Well, one thing I'm sure of is they didn't do anything terrible with it, but boy, did they evoke something terrible with it. I'm sorry to bring it up, but I'm glad I'm not alone in finding it so horrifying. Because I've watched it with many people who are just caught up in, like, that's a janky suit.
Yeah, but when you're a kid and, somebody grabs your favorite teddy bear and pretends to, like, do surgery on it or something, do you know what I mean? It's like, what happened to the part of us that went there, that we're bothered by things, by the implication of things, right? I don't need you to be, it doesn't need to be ER. I don't need to see it to understand the implication of what's happening.
I mean, it's the basis of theater. Like, you've been talking a lot about childhood and play, but then there's also theater where, you go and you see on the stage and they pretend, and you pretend with them. And I think it's a resistance to feeling that feeling.
That's exactly what it is. I think we have become so afraid of sensation in a way. This whole revolution of no sex scenes in movies kind of thing. It's like, I know it's uncomfortable to have a biological reaction in a film, but look, grow up,
I don't get that one at all. I don't know if it's some sort of newfound chastity or what's going on with that.
We're a country founded by pilgrims. It was never a good idea.
We have a lot more young people online. Like, not that it's only young people. I agree with you about the Puritanism, but in the queer community, there's a lot of queer teens that are coming into what used to be entirely adult spaces, and they're not sure how they feel about stuff yet, and they're not ready for stuff, and it's hard to provide, transitional spaces or in between spaces. But
I'm just being a dick. You're right. Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot.
no, I think you're right, too. There's that. There's absolutely that. It's just like I've been thinking about this other stuff with the quote, Puritans quote, and how they feel about pride.
All right, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages. The second season of the Paramount Plus series Halo, based on the Xbox game franchise, is now available on DVD, Blu-ray, and limited edition 4K UHD Steelbook. With every episode from Season 2 and nearly 2.5 hours of special features, see Master Chief, Cortana, and the other Spartans of Silver Team take on humanity's greatest threat, the Covenant. Get your DVD, Blu-ray, or limited edition 4K UHD Steelbook copy of Halo Season 2 today from Paramount Home Entertainment.
Of all Earth's great and ancient civilizations, none stands so mysterious as ancient Egypt. Though many believe their wonders to be the work of advanced engineering, recent discoveries point to a different answer. Aliens. Specifically the Mondo Shiwan, a metal-suited race of bipeds with keys for fingers who sought to keep the elemental powers of the universe safe from the ultimate evil, a big black sun that talks with a scary voice. Of course, one mystery remains. What is this symbol? This fifth element? Celebrate the 25th anniversary of the fifth element today.
That's right, we are continuing Sci-Fi July with a look at Luc Besson's The Fifth Element. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts for this week, Carol and Walter. So, Carol, what is happening with you, ma'am?
You can find me, as usual, at theculturalgutter.com, where we have a stable of writers who are dedicated to thoughtful writing about disreputable art. And you can find me on my own site, monstrousindustry.com.
When is the next Gutterthon?
I'm hoping to have it ideally done in October. I do not want to be fundraising too close to the election. So.
And Walter, how about you? What's keeping you busy these days?
You can find me at filmfreakcentral.net. I've been there for a while. I also appear randomly around. Who knows? I have a book that came out last year called A Walter Hill Film, Tragedy and Masculinity in the Films of Walter Hill. It's a film-by-film study of his movies and produced screenplays. It got onto the Sight and Sound top 10 list for best film books of last year. So my little plug, hopefully we get into the double figures in sales soon. And, I'm embarrassed to say that this is my actual introduction to Carol, but I'm a huge fan. Tonight, I'm going to go read your stuff. It's really such a pleasure.
I've been a huge fan of yours for a while, so.
I've really felt like I learned a lot, talking about this film with the both of you. So thank you for having me. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, this has been a great experience for me, too.
Carol is the one that really turned me on to this movie. And I don't know why I made the connection in my mind. Maybe because both of you have tweeted or posted about different things that were somewhat similar. But yeah, I think it was last year. I'm just like, my dream is to get Walter and Carol on the same show talking about Latitude Zero. So I'm glad that you guys made my dream come true, because this is better than I could have imagined. So thank you both so much. Walter, I've had your Walter Hill book to read forever, so I really want to read that, and then I'd love to get you on to talk about some Walter Hill, because we've covered a lot of his stuff, but there's certain things we haven't covered, and there's one that's kind of a Mount Everest of Walter Hill for me, which is The Driver. I would love to have you on as a co-host for a Driver episode.
Well, mark out some time, Mike. I can talk forever about Walter Hill. So, I would love to. Anytime that you want to talk about Hill, he's not only a remarkable artist, but a remarkable human being. And anything I can do to continue to sort of shove him back into the spotlight, I'd love to do it.
Well, thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.